Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles. If you could name the single worst problem in America today, what would it be? Would it be hunger, homelessness, poverty, unemployment, lack of education, crime? What would you pick? Well, the answer, in my opinion, might surprise you, but let's take a look at a recent news story before we get into this. You all recall the brutal beating of Tyree Nichols by 5 Memphis police. It's a very difficult video to watch. And of course, they beat him to death. And this went all over the news. And like clockwork, people started blaming racism. They started blaming white supremacy, even though they were 5 black cops beating a black man. And yet somehow it was the fault of racism and white supremacy. Take a look at this Libs of TikTok video from a white woman telling you that it's your fault if you're a white person.
I got a message today for some white people. If we have white people listening, paying attention, I wouldn't mind if you would do this with me. We rub our chests, we find our heartbeat, and we say, we did this. We did this. White supremacy did this. I'm talking about Tyree Nichols. The police didn't do this. The Memphis Police Department didn't do this. White supremacy did this.
So I remember watching some of these videos and thinking to myself, okay, how are white people to blame for black on black crime? How is white supremacy to blame? I'm just trying to work it through my mind. And I thought, wow, how insulting really to black people. Because what they're essentially saying when they blame white supremacy is they are denying human agency to black people. They're denying free will. They're essentially saying that, oh, you are so programmed to believe in white supremacy that you are just doing the bidding of your white masters, and you're not even aware that you're doing it. You're just you've so internalized this self-hatred. You've been under the boot of the white man for so many years that this internalized self-hatred is manifesting itself in beating up and harming and killing other black people. And so it essentially denies their free will and their free choice. It makes them the perpetual victim. Who incapable of choosing freely, incapable of acting on their own and making their own decisions. They're just sort of these programmed automatons who are programmed to do this. And in fact, that's exactly what one black man said on the Piers Morgan show. Let's take a look.
Okay, so anti-blackness is baked into society here and in the US, and black people are not impervious to that. And so what people fail to realise...
So black people are anti-black?
Yep, this exactly. So let me explain it. I know it's very confusing. Nonsense. So let me explain it. Let me explain it, Piers. So what people fail to realise is that when black people have to contend with racism, they can end up internalising it. And that can result in low self-esteem, self-loathing, and rejection of one's community. And when you combine those feelings, which, as we know, are also referred to as unconscious bias, when you have those feelings and they are compounded by hierarchy and power, it can lead to an individual abusing said power and projecting their self-hate onto another. And this is why, in my opinion, why we see black and white police officers killing more black people than we do white. Reason why is because of racism, which includes internalised racism, Piers.
Right. I think that's complete nonsense.
You would, because you're a white man and you don't understand.
Exactly, I'm white, therefore my skin colour means I have...
Because you don't have the lived experience.
My skin colour means I have nothing to do with it. All right, well, let me go to a black man and see if he's allowed to have a view. Zubi, what's your view?
I think that any attempt to put the blame on this in any way, shape, or form on racism or white supremacy or white people in general is absolutely ridiculous. I also think it's pretty degrading because this sort of idea stems from the notion that black people, black men, black women, that we do not have full agency and responsibility and therefore accountability for our actions and our words.
So racism is blamed for so many problems in America today. Racism, one race against another. But I believe the problem is far more fundamental than that. And it's something that most people aren't really talking about. Most people don't really think of this as the root problem. It's much easier to focus on the racism. That's what everybody does today. We have to look deeper. I bet you anything, I will bet you anything, that every single one of those individuals in that beating video of Tyree Nichols, the police beating him as well as Tyree Nichols himself, I bet you not a single one of those men had a good father in their lives. I bet you not a single one of those men had a father who set a moral, virtuous example in the home for their sons. I will bet you none of them grew up with a loving father who took an active part in their lives, teaching them right from wrong, setting an example of integrity. When young men grow up without a good father in the home, they become filled with rage. They become filled with rage. They could have the most loving mother in the world, but if they don't have a father also to love them, which young sons need, they become filled with anger and resentment, and they take that out on others and multiply that millions of times across the nation. And what do you see? What do you have? You have impending collapse. The family is the fundamental building block of society. If you have healthy families, you have a healthy society. If you have sick families, you have a sick society. And today, we can see it everywhere. We have a sick society. Like I said, multiply that rage millions of times across homes everywhere, because that, I believe, is one of the fundamental problems in America today: fatherless homes. Now, do you think I'm exaggerating? Maybe I'm being hyperbolic. Where do I get off saying this? How can I blame fatherlessness for this? Well, let me share an anecdote with you. There was a man who was a prison chaplain in charge of 400 men in prison. And to boost their morale, he decided on Mother's Day to have all the men make their own Mother's Day cards. And it turned out to be a great success, a great hit. All the men participated. They all created their own Mother's Day cards, and they mailed them off to their moms. And it was great. And so when Father's Day rolled around, he thought, well, let's do the same thing. Last time it was a great hit, let's do it for Father's Day. So he proposes the idea to all the men. Not a single man created a card for their father. Not a single man participated. Why is that? Because none of them had a good relationship with their father. Some of them didn't even know who their father was. And that is a very eye-opening anecdote. True story, by the way. Very eye-opening. Someone who's been talking about this problem for a very long time is Black conservative Larry Elder. He has some very alarming statistics to share.
We all know these statistics, that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. The Journal of Research on Adolescence confirms that even after controlling for varying levels of household income, kids in father-absent homes are more likely to end up in jail. And kids who never had a father in the house are the most likely to wind up behind bars. In 1960, 5% of America's children entered the world without a mother and father married to each other. By 1980, it was 18%. By 2000, it had risen to 33%, and 15 years later, the number reached 41%.
Fatherlessness is the single biggest cause of poverty and crime in this nation. Let me share a few figures with you. 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. 85% of all children who show behavior disorders come from fatherless homes. 80% of rapists with anger problems come from fatherless homes. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. The statistics do not lie. Fathers play an absolutely crucial role in their children's lives. And there is no doubt that the Black community is disproportionately affected. Let's take a listen to what Larry Elder once again has to say, this time on some disturbing statistics in various communities.
Out-of-wedlock births have gone from 25% in 1965 to 73% in 2015. For whites, from less than 5% to over 25%, and for Hispanics, out-of-wedlock births have risen to 53%. What happened to fathers?
So those are shocking figures. 3 out of 4 families in the Black community are children born out of wedlock. And usually that means the father is not really a part of their lives. Usually these children are being raised by mothers only, with very little to no involvement with the fathers. This spells disaster. And these were stats from 2015. I imagine the numbers are now worse in 2023. If we don't reverse these trends, it's going to get worse. Problems will get worse. And we can blame racism all day long. We can blame any ism all day long. If we don't look at the fundamental problem, the root, which is a fatherless crisis in this culture, in this society. And clearly it's going up across the board in many different communities. Like I said, we're headed towards collapse and disaster. We have to turn this around. Fathers have no idea how profound an impact they have on their children, both boys and girls. Girls without good fathers have a tendency to engage in more promiscuous behavior later on. Why is that? Because they're seeking the affection and the love in other men that they never got from their fathers. There's this phrase, girls marry their dads and boys marry their moms. You know, the effect of moms, I will talk about in a different episode. I want to focus on fathers today. It's true. You grow up to marry the father that you know. How your father treats you in the home is how you expect to be treated by other men, including your future husband. So if your father is abusive, if he's critical, if he's harsh, then girls are far more likely to marry an abusive, critical, harsh husband. You learn manhood first and foremost from your father, and the same goes with sons. That's how they learn manhood. They look to their fathers, which is why fathers have this incredible duty and obligation and responsibility to set a good example for their sons and to be there for their sons and for their daughters. We'll be right back with the show, but I'd like to take a moment to encourage you to sign up for a premium subscription if you haven't already. It's only $10 a month, which is a really rock bottom price, and it gets you thousands of hours of content on everything across the board: theology, philosophy, apologetics, history, everything. We have things for little children. We have things for adults. While we give a lot of our content away for free, the work that we do here does not come for free. It costs us money. The $10 a month will go a long way in helping us to continue to produce top quality, faith-based content, all with a view towards spreading truth, ultimately for the salvation of souls. So if you want to support us, please consider signing up for premium at churchmilitant.com/go premium. That's churchmilitant.com/go premium. Thank you so much for your support. How you relate to your earthly father profoundly affects how you relate to God himself, to God, your heavenly Father. Again, if you have a father who is harsh, he's critical, he's distant, then naturally you're going to see God the Father as harsh and critical and distant. You're going to have a difficult time relating to God the Father because of how your earthly father is, how you view just the very concept of fatherhood. I remember I myself had a revelation when I first read Saint Therese of Lisieux, her story of a soul. And I remember reading through that book and crying copious amounts of tears, just weeping through that book. And to this day, that is the only spiritual book that has that effect on me. I will pick it up and I'll read a passage and something about it will simply strike me. And before I know it, I'm in tears. And I realized a while back, part of the reason why that was is because her relationship with God, the Father, was so intimate. It was so tender. It was so loving. It was just so close as it's meant to be, that it would have me in tears. Because that was something that I myself lacked growing up. And I myself struggled greatly with having a close relationship with God the Father. To me, he was always sort of distant. He was always disappointed in me, critical, harsh. And it was very difficult for me to be able to relate closely the way that I always wanted to. And so when I read St. Therese's own relationship with God the Father, which was very much based on her extremely tender, loving, intimate, close relationship with her own Father on earth, it struck this chord in me. And St. Therese has helped me in that sense to draw much closer to God the Father. That's just to make the point that fathers, you have such a profound, crucial role in your children's lives, and it's so important that you understand that role. It's so important that you relate to your children in such a way that you can help them to relate closely to God and grow in sanctity because of your example and because your loving, respectful relationship with your own children. You know, it's really interesting. All the famous atheists that you can think of, they share one trait in common: a bad or non-existent relationship with their father. For instance, you have Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, who proclaimed that God is dead. Nietzsche's father died when Nietzsche was very young. He grew up very angry, very resentful that his father was taken away. And the rest of his life, he just never had that void filled. And he grew up essentially hating God and deciding, I don't need God. God is dead. There is no God. Sigmund Freud, he also had a terrible relationship with his father. He considered his father weak. He also said his father was a sexual pervert. Interesting, because Freud himself later on became a sexual pervert. You have Bertrand Russell, the famous British atheist. He also had a non-existent relationship with his father. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French atheist philosopher, he too had a very bad relationship with his father. Voltaire, the atheist philosopher of the French Revolution, terrible relationship with his father, terrible relationship with father figures in his life. The one common trait: bad or non-existent relationship with their fathers, leading them to reject God the Father, and then pushing that philosophy onto the rest of the world and influencing others in a very bad way. And related to this is the fact that children are far less likely to practice the faith if their fathers do not practice the faith, even if their mothers practice the faith. Let me share a few statistics with you from a study that was done on this very topic. If a father does not go to church, even if his wife does, only 1 child in 50 will become a regular worshiper. If a father does go regularly, regardless of what the mother does, between 2/3 and 3/4 of their children will attend church as adults. If a mother does not go to church but a father does, a minimum of 2/3 of their children will end up attending church. In contrast, if a father does not go to church but the mother does, on average, 2/3 of their children will not attend church. Another survey found that if a child is the first person in a household to become a Christian, there is a 3.5% probability everyone else in the household will follow. If the mother is the first to become a Christian, there's a 17% probability everyone else in the household will follow. However, when the father is first, there is a 93% probability everyone else in the household will follow. Look at those numbers. Look at those numbers. The father has a drastic and crucial impact in whether or not the rest of the family practices the faith. This is the way that God has created it. God has created it so that the father is the leader in the home. He sets the primary example, and he carries the greatest duty and the greatest burden and responsibility. When that father stands before the throne of God, as we all must, and he has to give an account of his life, one of the very first things God is going to ask is, did you save your wife's soul and your children's souls. Did you save their souls? What did you do to save their souls? Did you set a good example in the home? Were you there in the home? Were you faithful to your wife in thought, word, and deed? Were you active with your children? Did you teach them the faith? Did you set a moral example, virtuous example of integrity day after day after day? What did you do? And those fathers who cannot answer that well will face a severe judgment. They will face a severe punishment. Your actions matter. They matter intensely in this earth and in the next. Your children are the ones profoundly affected by your actions, fathers. Take it seriously for the sake of your soul here on earth and afterwards. There's a lie being spread today that men and women are interchangeable, that it doesn't really matter whether it's a man or a woman in the home, or whether it's two men or two women raising children, that it doesn't matter. Men and women are interchangeable and they can do exactly the same things in exactly the same way. That is absolutely not true. The statistics I just read to you bear that out. Men and women are not interchangeable in the home. Children have the right to both a mother and a father. You know the massive movement in France, the Manif pour tous, that massive demonstration of hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in the streets of France all over the place, demanding the right of children to have both a mother and father in the home. It was essentially opposition to so-called gay marriage. But what's really interesting about that movement is that many of the participants were atheists. They were secularists and they were leftists. And yet here they are opposing so-called gay marriage and demanding that children have both a father and a mother in the home. Why is that? Because this is not necessarily a left or right thing. It's not purely a Christian or Catholic thing. People with common sense understand children need both a mother and a father in the home, and that children have that right. And to deprive them of that right is absolutely immoral and wrong and detrimental to the child. While people are busy promoting gay marriage and the rights of these partners to do what they would like sexually, romantically with their own partners, the rights of children are being completely ignored. The good of children is being completely ignored. Children are being placed in second place while people are focused on, oh, what do I want to do sexually, romantically with my partner? It's me and what I want to do with them. What about the children? And again, it's a lie to claim that it doesn't matter if it's two men in the home or two women in the home or just one man in the home or one woman in the home. Children have the right to both a mother and a father. They have a right above and beyond your own right to your own sexual gratification or your own romantic interests. Children have that right first. Things are so insane these days, people no longer have any concept or clue of how to even define what a woman is versus a man, claiming that they're both kind of interchangeable, that you now have a Supreme Court justice who can't even tell you what a woman is. This was probably the most absurd moment during Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation hearing.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
The meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the law and I decide.
Well,
so I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
But back to this issue of fatherlessness, it's been argued that that is the number one issue affecting the Catholic Church today. The number one issue. Except in this case, It applies to our spiritual fathers, our fathers in the faith, our shepherds, the princes of the church, the bishops, the cardinals, the clergy. A lot of them, unfortunately and very sadly, are missing in action. A lot of them simply aren't there to protect us, to defend us, to fight for us. Do you remember when the whole COVID stuff came down, the pandemic, the lockdowns, and you have to shut down your churches and houses of worship? How many bishops actually fought that? How many bishops actually went to bat for us, the flock, who were starved of the sacraments during the time when we needed them the most? How many bishops? Could probably count them on one hand, if that. In fact, in a number of dioceses, the bishops went even farther than what the government required. They kept their churches closed longer than the government required. They deprived the flock of the sacraments longer than what the government itself required. How on earth can the faithful be drawn to the church and believe in the church and be strengthened in their faith when their own spiritual fathers have abandoned them, when their own spiritual fathers aren't fighting for them? And a lot of them have not returned to the church because there was that dispensation where you didn't have to go to Mass. And ever since that dispensation has been lifted, how many people have actually come back to Mass? How many? A lot of them decided, I'm just not going to come back. The sense of fatherlessness that a lot of Catholics feel from the church today, going to the very top, quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why so many Catholics don't practice the faith. Now, again, not all the blame can be laid on our shepherds. People have to take individual responsibility for their own choices. People can't simply reject the church because I'm angry at this priest or I'm angry at that bishop. But at the same time, blame can also be laid at the feet of these shepherds, these clergy who are missing in action, who aren't fighting for their flock, who aren't teaching and preaching the faith in its fullness because they're too afraid of what the world thinks. They're too afraid of persecution and pushback. They're weak fathers. Not all of them. There are plenty of good priests out there, so don't get me wrong. There's some good bishops out there as well. But honestly, they're in the minority, at least it seems to be. More often than not, we look out and we see a landscape of spiritual devastation, which is why it is so crucial that we pray for our clergy, that we pray for our bishops, cardinals, and that we pray for the Pope. And go beyond prayer, offer up mortifications for them, offer up sacrifices. I think part of the blame, is on us as laity because we are not praying enough for our leaders. It's tough. It is tough being a priest. It's tough being a bishop. You have a target on your back, not just from the world, but also from the demonic, from Satan and his minions. You have a target on your back. And it is a great victory for Satan when he gets one priest to fall, when he gets one priest to give in to temptation, fall and scandalize the flock, because he knows that that is going to lead many people out of the faith, away from the faith. If you could just get one clergyman to fall, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. Same goes for a bishop, even more so. If you get one bishop to fall, how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of souls will be lost because of that? We have to pray for our spiritual fathers in the faith. But once again, I just want to emphasize to those fathers out there, please, for the sake of your own souls, for the sake of your wives and for your children's souls, their lives, their futures, take your duties seriously. Set a good example in the home of virtue, of integrity. Be there for your children. Be there, be present, be active in their lives, and show them an example of love, of respect. Treat them with dignity. Let them know you're created in the image of God. You are loved incomprehensibly by God, and I love you. And I am here for you. I'm going to fight for you. I will defend you, and I will love you to the very end. Be that example, fathers, to your children. They need you. Their souls depend on it. Your soul, your salvation depends on it. And how do you do that? How do you be there for your sons? Turn to God, the Father. Turn to the all-loving Holy Trinity and ask for the grace to be a good father, to be a good husband to your wife, to be a good father to your children. God will give you that grace. You just have to ask for it every day and throughout the day. Ask for that grace. And if you're a priest, pray for the grace to be a good and faithful spiritual father to your flock. Their souls are depending on it. Your own soul and your salvation depends on it. Thank you once again for listening, and in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly.